Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our presentation today, the Resource Management Lifecycle, Effective Planning for Maximum Utilization. My name is Heather Champeau, and I'm the EPM Live Director of Product Marketing here at Upland. In my past life was an EPM Live Product Customer Solution Architect, and I'm also one of your webinar facilitators for today's presentation. I also have on the line with me Matthew Willey, who is on the EPM Live product team. He'll be helping us demo resource management tools towards the end of today's session. Before we get started, we first have a few quick logistics to go over with you. We are expecting a very large audience today, so we will not be able to open the line for questions. However, we will be monitoring the chat and the question panel throughout the presentation. Should you have any questions as we go through. You can also feel free to either reply to the webinar emails that you've been receiving via GoToWebinar, or you can send an email directly to me, and I'd be happy to answer any questions as well. You can see my contact information on the bottom of the slide. That being said, all lines will be muted throughout the presentation. If for some reason you do get pulled away during the webinar, no worries there. We will be distributing the recording of today's presentation as well to all registrants following the webinar. It usually takes about 24 hours to get that recording. We'll also send the slide deck as well. And finally, for those of you who need PDU information, we'll be giving you that information at the conclusion of the webinar as well. And with that, let's get started. For today's agenda, we'll be covering the following topics. First and foremost, what is resource management and who is involved in that particular discipline? Once we cover the basics of resource management, we'll move on to the resource management lifecycle and the 5 levels within it. And lastly, we'll touch on some effective resource management tools that you can leverage within your organization to improve that discipline, aligned to the resource management lifecycle, and then maximize resource utilization so that you can get more done successfully. So with that, we will dig into the details. Before we get into the levels of resource management, let's touch on the very, very basics. What is resource management? So Wikipedia defines resource management as the efficient and effective deployment of an organization's resources when they are needed. Of course, the term resources does not always refer to human resources, but all resources that need to be considered when you're working on work, when you're scheduling project activity, etc. For the purpose of this presentation, though, we're going to be referring to the management and processes for human resources and the 5 levels within it. Unlike some project management processes, in order to complete the resource management lifecycle, all resources must play a role. So each part of the lifecycle could be owned by a different stakeholder and will vary from organization to organization. Executive management will play a key role in identifying and selecting the right work and projects for the organization to execute. In many cases, they'll be the only be involved in resource management from a reporting and analytics standpoint. For example, which projects and work to include in the business portfolio based on resource management metrics and data. So that executive management team, depending on who defines your portfolio, who defines what the right work is, and who defines what work aligns with your strategic initiatives. In many organizations, the PMO will be in charge of inputting resource data into the resource management tool, whatever tool you're using today. The PMO will play a key role in the first 2 steps in the resource management lifecycle, including planning resource roles and then identifying which resources will fill them. So again, within each organization, it may vary at what point the PMO or the project team gets involved. The project manager will be involved primarily with execution rather than the planning stage of resource management. Once the resources are assigned, the project manager will be accountable for resource performance. So controlling the resources, controlling the changes that come into the project and how those resources will shift throughout, as well as how they are performing. The project team's role is to collaborate with each other, essentially to foster a positive team environment. Shared knowledge and expertise will be a critical factor in delivering work successfully. So if your resources aren't communicating with each other, if they don't have a proper environment to do that, giving them various tools to collaborate, then your projects won't be near as successful. And then finally, team members' main role will be to get the work done, right? They're the executors. So let's take a look at the full resource management lifecycle. So as you can see in the graphic on the screen, this is a very much a top-down approach to managing your resources. To accomplish full resource management within your organization, all areas must be considered and accommodated. Okay, so that being said, it's always wise to consider organizational maturity as it relates to resource management to ensure you're adopting the right amount of discipline and functionality at the right pace to ensure you're not introducing unnecessary risk. So you might not be able to accommodate all of these stages up front, but this is where you need to be in order to do it effectively. Okay. By the way, it's very common for users within an organization to be at different levels of maturity. That's the norm. One of the most important aspects of implementing and executing a new tool or a discipline is that you understand where your users and your audience and their needs are, as well as their current processes that they have in place, just to ensure that the new technologies introduced will be easily adopted. And that's key. So we're going to now touch on each level, drill into each level of the model there. So capacity planning helps to ensure that resource capacity meets current and future business requirements in a cost-effective manner. In this planning stage, you will need to identify all the roles needed for the given project or work effort at hand. For example, which organizations or departments will be involved in your project. This will help you establish the structure for your project, potentially establish how your tasks will be organized, and even identify security constraints. What disciplines and skill sets are required to complete your project. So without the proper skill sets and expertise, particular tasks may require more training, therefore longer turn times, possibly even result in rework. So effective resource management relies on the fact that these factors have all been considered prior to selecting your resources. Once you've determined your generic roles, right? So generic role would be, I need one architect, I need one developer, I need one, key QA specialist, right? You'll need to determine the quantity of each role needed as well as the time frame. As this information is obtained and you put the structure together, you will then be ready to analyze your plan, make adjustments, and prepare for actual named assignments. Okay? Resource allocation. So now it's time to assign your project team. Before we do, though, you have to look at all the factors involved in this process, right? Who's available and when? What competencies or experience do the resources possess? Have they worked on a similar project in the past? And if so, how well did they perform? Are they interested in working on the defined project? And finally, how much will it cost to obtain the resources for the project? So all of these are key for maximum utilization and efficiency, right? So if you have someone who's not trained in doing and performing and assigned to a specific role, it will take longer to get the job done. So I always recommend to look at your project priorities as well, right? So if you have priority 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, priority 1 projects or priority 2 projects, they need to ensure that you have all the right resources with the right skill sets assigned to those projects before you move on to the next priorities. In addition to the environmental factors, A roles and responsibilities document is always helpful. It should be completed prior to assigning resources, who's going to be doing what. An organization chart would also aid in this process when determining the resource assignments and when viewing the preliminary project schedule to see when each resource is needed and for how long. In many cases, though, the project teams are known in advance. That might be the case for your organization. In other instances, though, you may need to be prepared to enter a negotiation process with functional managers, maybe even other project managers, depending on, again, how the organization is shaped, should the resource be currently working on other projects. In this case, project priorities and benefits, as I mentioned before, may be weighed to determine which project has the greater need for the requested resource and the highly skilled resources. In many cases, if project teams are already over-allocated, there may be a need to consider acquiring resources from a third-party vendor or consulting firm. You may also consider whether or not having a virtual team will be adequate for your resource management needs. After resources are assigned and confirmed, you'll need to be prepared to manage all future changes that could potentially come up into play to ensure your plan is flexible, scalable, and is able to handle unexpected shifts in resource demand and allocation. And that's key because that goes back to that maturity model, right? Do you have a tool in place that as projects are brought into the mix, as priorities change, etc., that you can then put into effect scenario modeling, maybe is one way of doing it to ensure that you know how to shift your current assignments to be most effective moving forward. Resource work management. This is an ongoing process in the resource management lifecycle that begins with allocation and ends at the completion of the final project or work deliverable. This stage in the lifecycle is typically managed by the project manager. Again, it might vary based on how you're structured or per your organization. This process includes managing all assignments, tracking team member performance, providing project feedback and status, resolving issues and risk, and coordinating changes to enhance project performance. So all these tools necessary for project execution and management are also essential to your resources. As with any work that you have or project deliverable, time, resources, and cost must all be considered in order to effectively and successfully deliver the project. So you can't ever just look at your resources alone. Okay, you've got that triple constraint, time, resource, cost, and of course, overall quality of the deliverables. All right, let's look at resource collaboration. This is a key practice in the way we work today, right? So working together on deliverables allows us to streamline our work, deliver services, increase overall productivity across the organization. It's simple math, really. More experienced resources working together equals less time. Resource collaboration is, of course, a critical stage in resource management. If your resources aren't communicating, right, and they're not working towards a shared understanding of goals, carefully putting together a resource plan pre-execution will be less productive, right? So they must communicate in order to keep projects and work on track. When defining the tools to implement for this stage, ease of use, flexibility, those are two key essential components to ensure high user adoption and effective collaboration. I always recommend that you look at each stakeholder or as many stakeholders as you can for your projects. Stakeholders could be anybody that has a stake in the project, right? So if you have certain users on your team that are used to social type collaboration, you might want to use comment streams, right? Maybe embed a Yammer-like tool to allow them to communicate as they're used to communicating. Some people use Outlook, right? So you might want to give them ways to communicate via Outlook. So, talking to each one, or at least knowing who your resources are and how they work, what teams they're a part of, and how those teams are used to collaborating That's going to be key in providing them a tool that they will actually use. All right, so resource task management. The last level of the resource management lifecycle focuses on those accountable for individual work items. We all have work or work items that must be complete, and most likely that work is combined with our own personal to-do list as well. Not only our personal to-do list, but we've got the maintenance pieces of our job, right? That's just keep the lights on. How do I do my job well? We've got project type work, which is the most of them are tasked with end dates, right, or due dates that we're expected to get done or completed by a certain time. And then we've got our personal work on top of it. So in order to be the most productive, resources need a tool that will handle all of those tasks, not just one or two, but all of them, right? Resources must be able to gather their work, update their work, monitor all related work and dependencies in one view, in one place. If they have to go to 4 different places to see all their different types of work, one, they're not going to be able to deliver well because something could get missed. But 2, it's hard to see dependencies and priorities and due dates and all that good stuff if you're monitoring 4 or 5 different systems. So now that we've covered the discipline of resource management and the various levels within the life cycle, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Matthew to discuss various resource management tools that can be leveraged to help your organization effectively implement the resource management process. So some of the tools and the topics that he'll go over, resource planner, resource analyzer, resource grid, full resource negotiations, assignment planner, resource reports. So with that, I'm going to change the presenter over to Matt.
Thank you, Heather.
No problem.
As we switch over screens here, I'm going to be going through a brief demo, and I'll be moving through multiple different roles. So keep in mind as we're doing this, it's not, one person is doing all these different types of things in the system. We'll start out as more of a project manager, and then we'll move to more of a resource manager type of perspective in the system and what they would do, and how the whole process that Heather just went through works. So we'll start from the beginning, and we'll work our way through, and then take a look at some different reports and such that you can use to make decisions and things of that nature. So I'm logged in here as Steve Masters. He has permissions to be both a project manager and a resource manager in the system. That way we won't have to log out and log back in and switch back and forth between users. But I'll denote and tell you when we change from one to the next. So starting out as a project manager in the system, when I very first log in, I see on my home page here a social stream of things that are going on within my stream. So I can get real-time insight into issues that are being added to my projects and documents that are being updated, and I can comment on these things and collaborate and communicate and say, hey, I saw there was an update to this document. Is there anything I need to be worried about? Or there's a new risk. How are we handling this? How are we going to mitigate this risk? Those types of things. So really to provide transparency and provide a communication forum around the actual work and projects and resources, et cetera, that you're managing within the system here. So I'm going to jump into the Projects tab here within EPM Live, and that's going to take us to where all of our different projects are. So I mentioned I'm a project manager right now, and let's say I have a brand new project, and before this project is even approved, possibly, I need to build a high-level resource plan to answer 2 questions. Question number 1 is, how much resources do we think it's going to take to do this project? And is it 1 resource? Is it 10 resources? Is it 100 resources? And then what this is also going to allow me to do is question number 2, do we have the resources in that particular period of time to be able to do that project properly? First of all, I popped open my resource planner here. My project's here at the top, and there are no resources assigned yet. Down in the bottom, I see a list of all of the different resources in my resource pool. these resources have been pre-added into the system previously, and when you add in a resource, you say, okay, this resource is part of this department, they have this role. You can add in other custom fields like things like skill sets or location or anything that might be helpful when selecting resources, any other pieces of metadata, and you can add them in here. As well as you put their work hours and holiday schedule. So based on the amount of hours they're working and their holiday schedule, it's going to calculate how many hours of remaining availability is what's showing here. And then as people get resources approved for their projects, it's going to automatically subtract in real time from these numbers here. It's going to subtract that availability. So you can see if it's red in this particular month, this person is already over allocated. Now we're planning here by month, but we could do it by week. We do have some customers that do it by day, but month or week are usually optimal. And then you can also plan in hours, or you can plan in FTEs or FTE percents. I like FTEs just because it's a little bit simpler to look at. Instead of looking at 42 hours and knowing that that's a little bit over a day's worth of work, for example, or what's 160 hours, etc. I like looking at it, one FTE is 1 day or one full-time resource for this period of time, I should say, not 1 day. 1 month in this case, because we're planning monthly. So a lot of times, though, you don't know specifically what resource that you are going to start with, a specific name resource. I don't know that Ben Smith is going to be doing the work. It may not even be my job as a project manager to do that. It may be a resource manager, and I'm going to negotiate with them for the resources that I want. So a lot of times you start with generic resources. So I can just switch my view down here to generic resources. Now I see all of my different generics. And let's say for this particular project, it's a smaller project. I just need a project manager, let's say, and 2 developers. So I can just drag and drop my project manager, and I'll drag and drop my developer roles up here. And since I'm planning in FTEs, I'll go ahead and type in here for the developer role. I can just type in I need 2 developers in this particular month. There's a cool little tool here that makes it so I don't have to go type it in 1,000 times. Oops, not 12, we want 2. I can hit apply, and it'll go through and it'll put 2 in all of the different months for the length of this particular project for me, just to save me time on data entry. And let's say I need 1 full-time project manager for the life of the project. I can use that same tool here to copy that all the way across. And if it's more non-standard, maybe in a few months you don't need a project manager, you can go and remove that out and set that back to 0, whatever it might be, but we'll keep a simple project here. So a project manager creating the resource plan could be as simple as that. I could just leave it at this, hit submit, and then a resource manager for these particular roles or these particular departments, depending on how you do your resource manager, could then go in and approve it. If they were going to do it, what they would do is they would launch this resource planner tool, and they would come in and they would select, for example, the developer role here. And there's this really nice button called match. So I'll hit the match button. What that does is it looks through my resource pool and finds the people that are the correct department in the correct role and who have the most availability. So it has a kind of an algorithm that it uses to give a percent match. And the higher the percent match, the better that resource is, or the more available they are, and the more they meet the correct requirements for this particular resource that I'm looking for. So I can see Adam Barr looks like a good candidate. He's pretty free in that area. It looks like he can take some of that work. So we'll drag and drop Adam on top of my developer role here. And at that point, it asks me a question. So instead of having a lot of buttons all over the place, we try to make it intuitive so it realizes what you're trying to do and just asks you a quick question. Do you want to fulfill this resource requirement, or do you want to replace? So since we're looking for 2 developers, I don't want to replace, or I'd give him the full work of 2 developers, and he'd be over allocated, and that wouldn't be good. So what I'm going to do is hit fulfill instead. What's cool about this is it'll show me, okay, Adam Barr, it did give him the 2 full FTEs of work, but now we can come and we can say, okay, here's Jay, he's available also in this time period that we need him, and I can drag and drop Jay on top of Adam, and I'll hit split is one of my options. It realizes, oh, you either want to split or replace, so I'm going to hit split. And now it splits up that work in half, so that Adam is doing 1 FT, Jay is doing 1 other FT. We're a tiny little bit over allocated on Adam here, but maybe we're okay. Maybe we want to get someone else to help with that. That would be up to the resource manager in that situation. But the cool part is you can see up here on the developer row, the original request was for 2 FTs and 0 FTs are remaining. If I was to change this down to 0, you can see that shows that there's still 1 FT remaining that still needs to be fulfilled. So in real time, it calculates that for you. Especially if you have a larger project, it's really helpful to be able to see that there, and that's why the fulfill function's kind of cool and really helps out. So then I'll go ahead and do the same for my project manager. I'll select that, hit match, find a project manager here that looks available and meets all my criteria, hit fulfill, and that's it. I've now found resources for this particular project. Well, that's all fine and great if you have resources available in this time period, but what if you don't have resources available in this time period? And we need to start making adjustments and maybe certain projects we just can't do right now, those types of things. How do we see all of that data and how do we make those decisions? So we have another tool called the Resource Analyzer, which is going to help me to do that. So still, maybe my project has not been approved yet, depending on your type of organization. Some organizations, like services organizations, for example, when you sell a services deal, you go and you do that project. There's no if we're going to do it. It's more of when are we going to be able to do it and what are we going to commit to the client. But in many organizations, it's more like we have a bunch of project requests, so to say, and we have to figure out how we're going to handle that. Even in the other scenario where you have to do all these projects, you still may need to do some moving around, or maybe we need to hire a resource or whatever it might be, and the resource analyzer that I'm opening up here is going to help us to do that. So what I've done is I've selected a group of projects. So say these are all my unapproved projects that haven't started yet, and I need to kind of figure out how we're going to move resources around and maybe hire some resources. Maybe we need to use some contractor work temporarily, whatever it might be. This tool is going to help me to figure out those types of things. So in the top here, it's loading all the projects that I selected, and then in the bottom, it's going to show me all of my different allocation. So I'll expand this here. These are all the projects I selected, and in the bottom, this is showing me if these resources here are over allocated or not. So you can see, for example, Steve Masters in January is over allocated, but all in all, I'm looking okay. But what you can do is, okay, I have a problem with Steve. I can come up and I can change my view here, and there's lots of different ways to look at this, but kind of cool. You can update the views. They're all configurable. So right now I'm grouping by project, but maybe I instead want to group it by resource, then project, so I can see exactly what Steve is working on. I can simply drag and drop that in there, and then it'll update and it'll show me now. I would scroll down to Steve Masters, and I can see specifically what Steve Masters, which projects, so to say, he's working on and how long he's working on it. So there's lots of different ways that you can look at the data within the system here. But basically, the idea is that I'm going to come in, I'm going to look at all my different work, see where I have problems, and then I can make adjustments, and that's the really cool part. So let's say here I can see that for this particular project, the new product development project, I have a lot of work going on. Well, what I can do is I can come in and I can simply drag and drop that over to the right, and when I drop that, it's going to then update my bottom row down here, and it's going to show me, how that affects my particular resource plan. So that's a really great way to be able to see changes. Like what if we stagger these projects a little bit better? How does that update my data here? You can also simply just uncheck the project as a whole and see how that is going to affect my resource plan. If I uncheck that project, excuse me, then it'll update here and it'll tell me, okay, if we don't do that project, then we're going to see these resources doing this type of things here in the particular resource planner. So it's a really great tool that allows you to see all that data in real time, and this is all what if scenarios, right? This isn't actually changing any of those original resource plans. We're just saying, what if we don't do this project? What if we move that project out? How is it going to affect the allocation down here? Another cool feature is right on the fly, you can say show graph, and maybe I want to look at this data in more of a graphical manner. This is showing me the group of resources that I selected, how much total availability they have, and which resources are being used for which amount of availability per period, which is in month here. So you can see the team as a whole actually has a lot more availability, especially when we look further out. There's more projects that we can do. But some people, like for example Brian Cox here in February, is over allocated. So really just need to spread out the work a little bit better. We have plenty of allocation. We can probably even take on more projects, right? One other cool thing that you can do is, right now I'm looking by resource, but a really nice way to look at it is instead by role, especially if you have a lot of resources like I do here. Let's see, instead of, specific resources over allocated, I want to look and see if the developer role as a whole is over allocated, and you can see that's all green. That's all looking good. So that just goes to prove my point. We have plenty more availability, even by role, to do more work. We just need to go pick more projects and figure out what we're going to do to make sure that we get the most allocation out of those resources. But it could be the opposite. We could see that developers are all red all the way across. Maybe we need to hire an extra developer, or we need to do less projects, that kind of a thing. Once you get a good scenario the way you want it, you can save that scenario. You can save 2 or 3 different scenarios, take that to your steering team or whoever makes the decisions of kind of what we're going to do and say, okay, here's pros and cons of scenario 1, here's pros and cons of scenario 2, here's scenario 3. And then make a decision. Okay, we're going to, scenario 3, that means we have to hire some resources, and then we can do all these projects, that type of a thing. So it's a really great way to analyze those resource plans and figure out, at a high level, before you go and do any detailed scheduling, are we going to have the resources to do this? How are we going to do the work that we need to do? So that's definitely a very popular tool for sure, and something that helps solve a lot of challenges, real challenges that are much harder to solve in a tool like, for example, Excel. It keeps all the data in one place and it lets you view across all the different data points. So next, I'm going to go to our resource pool. So you can kind of take a different approach at this. Instead of opening up the resource plans for 5 different projects, I can come into the resource pool, and probably more of a resource manager would be interested in doing this more than, say, a project manager. So, keeping going here as a resource manager, what I can do is I can switch to, say, resources by department view here. And I can see I'm the resource manager for the software development department, or maybe I'm the department manager, whatever your terminology for it is. I'm in charge of managing those resources. And I can come under tools here, and I can pop open that same resource planner, but instead of popping it open for specific projects, I'm opening it up for specific resources, and it's going to show me which projects they're working on. So resource managers really like that because, I'm not so interested in which projects we're doing. I'm just interested in my resources and which projects they're being asked to work on. And now I can come in here and use those same tools. I can do the match, and I can find people, and I can replace people. I can go, actually I need Martin for this other project, so I can move him over there to that project, different things like that. So it's, just really a different view of the same tool that we were looking at earlier. And the same with the resource analyzer. You can use it from this perspective as well. There's also another really great tool that I loaded with some good data earlier that's called the assignment planner. So the assignment planner is a little bit different. It's looking at actual scheduled work. So we weren't looking at actual tasks and risks and issues and service requests and backlog items, actual work items when we were doing that resource planning. We were looking at high-level resource plans. I think I'm going to need 2 developers for the next 3 months, that kind of a thing. This is more detailed. This is looking at the actual tasks and such that a person is working on. So how does that work? I'll take a step back here, and we'll go back into projects. So for a particular project, I can build a schedule. So let's say my project was approved, and we figured out, based on the resourcing, the budget, and there's lots of other things that you might take into consideration that we didn't talk about that are all, supported within EPM Live as well. But let's say my project's been approved. I now need to create a project schedule. I can come to my project here, and I'm going to say Edit Plan. I have multiple options of how I want to build my project schedule. I can either use our online project planner, which is a great tool that allows you to build your project schedule with all the different constraints and linkages, etc., all right online without needing to download any other tools or any licenses for any other products. Another popular option is Microsoft Project, since many project managers already use that. We have a full sync or integration with Microsoft Project that allows you to publish your Microsoft Project schedule into EPM Live, so that then you can see all these reports and use all these tools on that same data that you built in Microsoft Project. And we do have some Agile capabilities as well, like an Agile planner and a Kanban planner that allows you to, visually move work items from one status to the next, along with many other use cases as well. But I'm going to go ahead and open up our online project planner, since most people are already familiar with Microsoft Project. And I'll just build a really quick schedule, and then we'll go and see how we can play with that data within that assignment planner that we were looking at. It's not only tasks that we support in that assignment planner, though. It's a full view of all of your work. So if you assign someone an issue or a risk, or if you're tracking backlog items, service requests, non-project work, whatever it might be, that's all going to show up there in that assignment planner. This is really just one input of work as actual tasks on a project schedule. So all you do is you come in, you create your task 1, I'll create my task 2, and then I can assign these tasks to, say, myself. And now that work's going to show up within my workload, and I can put work hours on here and a duration, start dates, and I have my different linkages in here, finish to start, finish to finish. All the basic tools that you might use in a planning tool like a Microsoft project, for example, all exist within this online planner. But it's a lot more streamlined. It's all built right in and integrated right into the system. So it's also a cost saver because it doesn't require any other licenses, right? But basically, you come in, you build the project schedule, save, publish, and then that's going to kick off the workflow of those tasks. And now when I go back to my resource management tool, I'll see those particular tasks in here, and I'll be able to start looking at, okay, well, we plan this person to work full-time for the next 3 months on this project. What's actually happening? Does he have other service requests that are affecting him, or is he a developer and he has backlog items on one of our applications or products or whatever it might be? And I can come in and see things like, for example, Martin Weber here is over allocated within this particular week. He's being asked to do basically, double the work that he can handle per day. So 8 hours per day is what this is saying, and he's being asked to do 16 hours per day, so he's over allocated. And you can actually then do some what-if scenarios with the actual work here, just like you did with the resource plan, and say, okay, what happens if we give him twice as long to do this particular task? So I can stretch that task out here, and now it updates and shows me, yep, that's going to solve the problem. And this is all just what-if, though. I haven't messed with anyone's tasks yet. But I can move things around. I can reassign tasks and maybe split the work with him and another person. I can come in and I can comment on this particular task, and I can say, hey, I'm having a problem here with Martin Weber. He's over allocated in this particular period of time. Is it okay if I give him more time to do this task? Is it a critical task, right? You can look into those types of things, post those back to the project manager, and the resource manager and the project manager can kind of do some back and forth negotiation there and talk about how we're going to solve this problem. If I do hit the publish button, any changes I made, it will try to make those changes, but what it'll do is if it's impacting any project schedules, if it's a task in a project schedule basically, it'll first notify that project manager and say, hey, this task is being requested to be extended by 2 weeks when it was originally planned for 1 week, and they can approve or reject that and then comment back, and we can try to figure out a way to resolve this issue. Maybe we need to get someone else to help, those types of things. So this is a really great tool to look at what actual work is going on right now. So resource management at more of the execution time, instead of what we were looking at earlier was more planning for the future, kind of capacity and demand management, those types of things. Cool. So once you've planned your resources, you've got them allocated, you're now managing your projects and you're executing your work, and you're managing and keeping up to date on who's over allocated and who's not, who can take on more work, and making adjustments as needed. Then we also have some great reporting capabilities which you can use excuse me, to really see what's going on, as well as communicate that to other stakeholders. So the assignment planner is great for a resource manager, but maybe I need to send a report out to a particular executive or department manager or whatever it might be. A report like this might be the better option. So what you can do is you can come in and you can run different reports. There's hundreds of reports available. This is one that I really like called Resource Work versus Capacity. What you do is you select a bunch of resources here, maybe all the resources in your department, or maybe just one specific resource who's having a problem right now, whatever it might be. And then you select a scope of work. I've picked issues, risks, and tasks, but I could have also picked other types of work like backlog items and changes, and even to-do items if you want to keep track of that. You pick a start and a finish date. And then a lot of our reports allow you to control how you want to see it. Since I picked a large period of time, I selected months, but I could look at this by weeks or by days or by years, depending on what level of detail that I want to see in my report. And all that same data we've been working with in the system, right? All those same project schedules and issues and risks come and populate into here. And in the top, I see that, again, I have a very similar picture to what I saw in my original resource analyzer, that now that we're actually executing, we didn't schedule enough work. So the team as a whole is scheduled to do this much work, but they have this much availability. So we need to really give them a lot of extra work. But if I look down below at the details of each individual resource, I can see that certain people like Alice are over allocated in particular areas. And then I can drill in and see, okay, Alice is working on the next gen CRM project, and here are the tasks that are assigned to Alice, and how many hours each task is assigned for, and that she's over allocated in these particular months, because it looks like the largest task with the most work that she has is this implement and test backup here. So I can drill in, and I can even look at other work, things like backlog items, etc., non-project work. All that will all come into here if you choose it when you run this report. And then I can export this out to either a PDF or Excel or Word. I can also subscribe to it, so it'll send me an email every week or every month or whenever I want with this particular report. That's kind of a cool feature. Or you can send an alert. So when someone goes into the red, for example, I might be able to set up an alert. So that, I might want to set up an alert so that people, when they go into the red, that I get a notification. Or maybe if they go under a certain allocation, I get a notification. So there's some really cool reporting tools that you can use here, and this is one of the resource management reports that I really like. We'll take a look at a couple other of the reporting capabilities here within the system as well, and how you can use them from a resource management perspective. As I mentioned, there's tons of reports in here, from everything from issues to changes, budgets, all the above. But if I come in here and I click on the Resources tab, we have some cool reports. One that I like is, for example, resource plans by department. So this is looking at it at a much higher level by department, what resources are being used or being scheduled to be used anyway. It's looking at that resource plan data that we originally built. Excuse me. And I can see, for example, that by departments I have, different resource usage over time. So you can see as a department's building up and building down, maybe we just haven't planned out that far as well. Could be some of the reasons for the data. You have filters here. If I just want to filter for a specific department, like the software development department, I can select that, hit update, and then it'll refresh down here. I can also pick specific resources if I do want to filter out for specific resources and see specifically what they're doing within that department. So this is a great report for like a department manager to come in and see what's going on with their department. And then I can even see the individual resources below, what projects they're working on, how many hours they're scheduled to work on those projects. But the really cool thing is right now it's pivoting by year and month is what this is. So this is 2013 year or month 1. I can come in though, and I can go and I can change that just by going to my pivots here. It's grouping by year and month right now. Let's say I want to look at it by year and quarter to make it, aggregate that data a little bit different. I just select that different pivot, year and quarter, and now when I come down here, you can see I'm looking at it by year and quarter instead of year and month. So it's really easy on the fly for someone to really customize or configure this report without having to be a developer or go back to whoever created the report, and you can make some changes. You can add in extra fields on the fly right here. I'm just looking at resource and project name, but maybe I also want role in here. I can come in and I can grab role and I can add that over to the side. Different things like that. You can even add in extra filters if now I want to also filter by role, then I can add in that filter and do those types of things. So it's really cool to build these reports on the fly. And again, you can export these reports also out to Excel and Word and all the different formats. So really that's kind of the whole life cycle, and you just keep iterating through that, right? I'm building resource plans, I'm figuring out when I think that those resources can be available, if we need to hire more resources, etc. Then I schedule the actual work. As we're doing the work, I can use my assignment planner to make adjustments and what ifs and figure out how we're going to resolve issues with over allocation or under allocation. And then I can use reports, etc., to communicate what's going on with my resources to management or any other stakeholders that might be involved and might need that information. So with that said, I'm going going to go ahead and turn it back over to Heather. She has some more information for everyone, PDU information, etc., I believe. So I'll turn it back over to her and she'll give you some more information and some links to how you can go to our website, etc. Maybe even schedule a demo if you're really interested and want to get more information. So Heather, I'll go ahead and turn it back over to you.
Great. Thank you, Matt.
No problem.
All right, so hopefully you guys can see my screen here. Thank you again for joining us for today's presentation. If you would like to learn more about EPM Live, we welcome you to visit our website at epmlive.com. From there, you can access trials. We have some free trials available. We have additional webinars that might be helpful to you, white papers, videos, etc. If you have any questions, as I mentioned earlier, regarding today's webinar and we weren't able to get to you during the webinar itself, please feel free to reach out to me directly. You'll see my contact information on the screen. For those of you who need PDU information, the number is listed on the screen as well. So with that, we'll say goodbye and we look forward to our next webinar with you. Have a great day.